This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Kevin Maguire.
If you're concerned about the decline of the high street, and let's face it, high streets are at the heart of most communities, whether you're in a village, a town or a city. If you're concerned, is the real answer use it or lose it? Yep, they face huge competition from out-of-town shopping centres and the rise of online retailers, including Amazon, which seems not to pay very much tax in here. If you ever buy anything through Amazon, you'll see in very small type it says you're buying it through Luxembourg. Really pull the other one. About time these corporations were forced to pay up. But the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, and I'm old enough to remember when a budget was a closely guarded secret until the day, unless it leaked. But now stories are placed in advance. And the latest one is 1.5 billion for the high street, supposedly going to small companies. That 900 million we spoke about, business rates relief, 650 million, a spruce up high street. Will it make any difference? Should we just let high streets die? Or do you think they're too important and we need to come up with ways of keeping them going? Because if you look at the list of retail casualties during recent years, it's astonishing. Toys R Us, Mappin, JJB Sports, Comet, Borders, Zavvi, Blockbuster Video, and Woolworths. I can remember a time when Woolworths was on every high street and the idea of it not being there was something totally alien. But they've gone. Others are taking hits, making redundancies. Pound World, Homebase, Prezzo, Jamie's Italian, all suffering. So what do we do about it? Is the high street worth saving, or do you just let it go? 0345 6060 973. And I'm joined by Andrew Teacher, who's a retail expert and founder of Blackstock Consulting. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Kevin.
Is it worth saving the high street?
I think some of them yes, some of them no. I think one of the things certainly I see as a consumer, as a buyer of stuff occasionally, is that it's not just business rates that are to blame. It's not just evil landlords that are to blame. Often a lot of these shops and restaurants are pretty badly run. I mean, we've got this kitten that we bought a year ago, and she's got a penchant for causing a bit of havoc and not using her allocated toilet, let's say, which has cost us a fair bit of money in dry cleaning bills for duvets. So we went into John Lewis recently to go and buy some pillows. We had a certain type we wanted, and they just said, sorry guys, don't have these, we don't have any of this sort of brand at all, go online. And that was what they told us in their big shop. Now, obviously, we went somewhere else. But even when John Lewis, and now John Lewis and Partners, to give it its full law firm moniker that they've recently rebranded it with, if even those guys are telling you to hoof it online, then what does that say about the high street? And I think, again, so you mentioned some of the insolvencies we've seen, and I'm old enough to remember 10 years ago when everyone started doing these company voluntary arrangements, these CVAs that you've seen in the press over the last few weeks, and they were with Game and Black's DIY, all these companies going bust 10 years ago. And a lot of the recent ones have been Byron Burger, Gourmet Burger Kitchen, all these really expensive, nonsensical burger places that give you the sort of £20 hamburgers. And the reason why they're going bust isn't because of business rates, it's because they're stupid enough to think that there's a demand for 3 Byron burgers in the middle of Manchester. And that's not business rates to blame. It's not the Chancellor's fault. That's whoever sat in the head office of some burger chain thinking, we've got enough, there's enough demand for 3 hamburger joints in the square mile of Manchester. So I think we've got to look at it in the round, and I think we've got to be fair to politicians. There's only so much they can do, but you're right, totally right, that there has to be some sort of level playing field between online retailers who pay diddly squat in tax and people on the high street have been hit not just by business rates but by minimum wage hikes, by corporation tax hikes, by parking charges kicking down the customers at the knees, and by all sorts of other things that just make it much harder to go and shop in the community.
The overall package announced by Philip Hammond, 1.5 billion, sounds rather...
Love the word
package.
It's a great word. Well, love your package, Kevin.
For instance, 650 million of that is over 4 years for rejuvenating the high street. Do you think it'll make much of a difference?
I think the press release called for an end to toothless high streets. I think it's a toothless policy. I think we have all these brilliantly vague words, and look, I'm not political at all. And in fairness to Labour, this is pretty much exactly the same policy that Ed Miliband announced a couple of years ago. So,
not again.
Yeah,
these policies keep coming back.
Energy caps, we've had that. Business rates, we've got that. And the reason why it was a rubbish policy when Ed Miliband announced it was because business rates is charged at a property level. So if you say we're going to help 1.5 million small businesses, what you actually mean is we're going to help the people that pay business rates in 1.5 million small properties. And it's not the same. This isn't me trying to be pedantic with you, Kevin. What I'm saying is that a lot of small properties are owned by big companies. So companies like Pret, companies like Boots, HSBC, any sort of bank or eatery, sandwich place, coffee places have lots and lots of small properties. And if those small properties fall within the line that the Treasury's advisors have drawn in the sand to get lots of press coverage over the last few days, if some of those properties are owned by big companies, then they will get exactly the same tax break as the newsagent in Wakefield, as the butchers in Bradford, as the fishmonger down in Surrey. So I would think many listeners to this show, Kevin, would say, well, hang on a second. Why do Boots need a tax break? Why do Pret need a tax break? Shouldn't we actually be focusing this on actual entrepreneurs and SMEs?
So a slice of Philip Hammond's money, ultimately our money, will go to Walgreen, the US owners of Boots, and Coca-Cola owns Pret a Manger.
Costa. Yeah. All I'd say is I haven't seen the details because all we're going on is the pre-leaking that's been going on to get a bit of positive press coverage ahead of the budget. But if it is exactly the same as Ed Miliband, which is likely as it could be, then those could be beneficiaries from that. But I mean, obviously, I haven't seen the details, so I can't categorically say it's true. But it was certainly true when Ed Miliband announced it.
Yeah. What would you do then? And come on, you're a consultant. You give people advice. Companies will ask you what should they do. What do you propose to revive the high streets?
I think there's a multitude of things. None of them are easy. So it's not. There's no easy tick box thing that fits on a press release, and that's why the Tories probably haven't announced anything like that over the weekend. I think first thing we need to do is for George Osborne, the previous Chancellor promised to enact a radical overhaul of business rates before he left to take on his job editing the London Evening Standard. And George promised this because there'd been numerous calls for it over the years. There were consultations on it, and absolutely nothing has happened because it's a bit too difficult for the government to do whilst we are toing and froing over Brexit. So firstly, they need to do that. We need some kind of modern system that taxes success rather than simply acts as a fixed tax as we have now. There has to be some proportionality between the amount of tax you pay reflecting how much you've earned.
So at the moment, it's a cost on the.
It's a fixed cost.
On the shop you have.
Yeah, so if your shop,
how much you make.
Exactly. If your shop, so I won't bore you. We don't need to go into the technical detail, but basically, there's a big list, massive list of properties that's owned by a government agency called the Valuation Office Agency, the VOA, and they have a massive, great list of all the properties in the UK that has essentially a notional value. So if it's a big shop in somewhere posh like Regent Street in the west of London, that's going to have a big rating bill. And if it's a small shop somewhere slightly cheaper, if you've got a newsagent in Teesside, that's going to have a slightly lower ratings bill, well, a much lower ratings bill than for example, Philip Green's Topshop Emporium in Oxford Circus in West London. So the rating bill will correlate with that. But that's a fixed cost. So even if you don't sell any newspapers in your little newsagent in Teesside, you are still paying that ratings bill. So that's a fixed cost. It's not a variable cost. Whereas if you turn the lights off, your electricity bill is going to go down. So,
now you can join in this conversation. I'm going to keep Andrew in the studio to take your calls. 0345 60 60973. So you can make your point. You might be a retailer. You might be a shopper. You might be somebody concerned about the future of your high street. So give us a call. We turn this into a great big conversation. 0345 60 60973. Goes, will this cash injection resurrect the high street? Can it compete in an online consumer age? Is it worth saving the high street? Or, have your consumer habits changed? I buy online as well as going to shops. I'm sure just about everybody does now, as long as you've got a computer. This question, Andrew, of business rates keeps coming up time and time again. It seems to be the one issue I keep hearing about. What proportion, if I had a butcher's or a newsagent's or a little store, what proportion of my costs would be actually on business rates? Is it 10%, 20%, 5%?
It's going to really depend it's going to depend in a large way on where you are, but certainly the proportion within all the bills that you have, the relative size of business rates within that outgoing has probably doubled in the last 10 years. So
that's pretty big then, yeah.
Yeah. So again, it will depend on a multitude of things. You'll pay more business rates where you are, depending on where you are and on the type of property. But I think that the point is that there's always a certain amount of tomfoolery that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to budgets and tax, and it's all about PR, it's all about headlines. And what we've seen is that whilst corporation tax has essentially come down, rates have gone up. So and that has largely been that's been a way to placate the big supermarkets who have been hit by minimum wage rises and other things, and so the government has pandered to Tesco as to Sainsbury's and Co. by keeping corporation tax down, which again, many retailers, and I run a small business, I employ 12 people, I would quite happily have a small rise in corporation tax to have a cut in business rates if I was paying rates on a building. And I think that unfortunately massively is disproportionately hitting smaller businesses and larger businesses. But going back to your question about what needs to happen, I mean, look, let's be honest, what they've announced in terms of business rates is both a package, so it's not a tax break of $1.5 million, it's a package of stuff. Some of that stuff would have been previously announced. It's also temporary. Short-term relief is not in perpetuity. And I think, again, looking at business rates in the whole year, it's a tax raise, it's £28 billion. It's a huge wedge of cash, and that is why the government has been reticent to really mess about with it too much, because it's a lot of money. But I think the problem is that we are seeing an increased, an accelerated amount of companies going bust, not just the Toys R Us and the Pretzos and the gourmet burger kitchens, but obviously, there's now questions in the market around the future of big companies like Debenhams, and even M&S is not going to escape scrutiny over the next few months. So again, how many more companies have to go before the government does something? That's the question now being asked. So the reason why I think business rates is coming back and again is because it is something that has increased so much over the last few years. Yeah,
we're approaching crisis point. We're going to take your calls on the death or the decline of the high street next. The number you need is 0345 6060973, or you can text 84850 or tweet at LBC. I'm Kevin Maguire here on LBC, and the time is 2:16.
This is LBC with Kevin Maguire.
We're discussing the future of the high street. It's in decline. How do we revive it? If you think it is worth saving, 0345 6060973, number to call. Quite a few of you have. I've got retail expert Andrew Teacher here in the studio to join the conversation. Gary's in Enfield. Welcome, Gary.
Yes, I've got a newsagent and a convenience store. The one that hits me the most, business rate, incidentally, I think your colleague will tell you, in the first year you get a fantastic relief on that. You practically hardly pay anything. Now, business rate do hurt, but not as much as the incredible rent rises I have to suffer. And particularly when you have a kind of a pension organization owning a block of that shop parade, they insist on certain improvements that you have to pay an incredible amount towards that. It's a rent. And I had a third shop, and I gave it up mainly because the rent rises I was suffering. So business rates at least is going to the council, but then you have to search how council using those rates or whoever's using those rates. But to me, rent is what hurts me the most. And Debenhams and these large, huge retail stores, I wouldn't be surprised if the rent on those high streets and that hitting them, more than the rates itself.
It is, but with Debenhams and those sorts of big shops, there's a sort of bigger story there, because the owners of those buildings and those chains like Debenhams, House of Fraser, and BHS previously, had changed hands many, many times. And every time they changed hands, the new owners would basically agree new leases for lots of the shops. And they'd sign up to ridiculous long lengths. So some of the Debenham shops have got 75-year leases on them. And the reason why they would do that is because when a building's got a long lease on it, it's worth a shed load more money. And what they'd do is they'd sign up to these ridiculous leases. Buildings would be worth more money. Then they'd sell off the buildings. And agree and rent them back on these long leases and trouser lots of cash, pulling it out of the businesses. So that is why historically, when you see newspaper articles saying, "Oh, poor old Debenham's got all these long leases," it's because lots of people have done, questionable financial dealings where an absolute ton of dividends have been pulled out of those companies and left an absolute chain of debt or chain of lease agreements around the necks of these companies.
Gary, do you feel you're just exploited? They know you can't easily move, so they keep putting up the rent.
Hi, sorry, are you addressing that to me?
I am, Gary. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the rent. It's difficult to. The days when you can pick up a really good business are not there anymore. There's so much competition, particularly from Europe, who've actually come in and opened up with huge capital shops. For me, it is difficult when you look for another shop, and when you negotiate a new. I mean, the business rate's basically the same wherever you go, or there's a standard formula. But with rent, if somebody's desperate to buy that shop, you're in their hands, and they'll just give you a short lease and then review every 3 years or 4 years. And then put it up beyond the rate of inflation and beyond what the business is rising in the high trade. So the landlords have a big part to play in this, I think, more than anyone else. And I wouldn't put it too much on rates. Landlords need a careful, scrutiny in how they make you pay for things around the building or part of the building, which really, in my cases, didn't really need improvement, but I was forced into it.
Well, Gary, you say you were forced into it, and it's a fair point you make, because many, again, as you say, many commercial property owners, many of the people that invest in high streets and shopping centres are pension funds. They are essentially fund managers backed by pension fund cash. So it's kind of ironic in a way that it's your cash and my cash. But when you're dealing with your landlords, do you have an advisor acting on your behalf? Are you doing this yourself?
Oh, yes. I mean, in the end, I have to involve a third party. I need to get a surveyor. I need to get the rate of value. I do everything I can, but it's very difficult to.
But do you have a negotiator? Do you have a tenant representative company that acts on your behalf? Because I think that's what you need to do. That is what it'll be worth the money, because again, you'll be dealing with the big professional agents that landlords use will screw you down on costs. But that's business. And I think what you need to ensure, and what any business needs to ensure, is that it is represented. And it's one of the issues that I have as a small business, and the companies that I advise, I advise some big companies that do this, that invest in properties, and people that advise. But one of the mistakes that people make is not paying for proper professional representation. And if you don't do that, then you are potentially going to get rolled over when it comes to negotiations.
Okay.
Well taken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Anthony's in York. What's your experience, Anthony?
Up until 12 months ago, I had 7 pubs in the sort of Yorkshire area. And this Wednesday coming, I actually closed my final pub. And part of my reasoning for doing this has been the increased overheads, predominantly surrounding business rates. Last year, April time last year, when the business rates revaluation came out, the business rates payable for myself across my 7 sites went up £140,000 payable. I wasn't earning £140,000 out of it myself, so where this money was supposed to be coming from was sort of beyond me, really. That coupled with minimum wage increases and things like that. I mean, I have no objections to paying my staff more money. My question is on that point, on the minimum wage side, is cheap political points that, all they're doing is transferring that problem onto the small business owner to find the way to pay their staff more money without any sort of solution coming from the government. In the same situation with business rates. And there's not parity in business rates either. You mentioned earlier about the big supermarkets. I speak to a lot of small business owners, and my greengrocer, for example, his business rates are 4 times more per square foot than the Morrison supermarket that is 200 metres away, and 3 times more per square foot.
Andy, let's put that to
supermarket.
Yeah, let's put that to Andrew. Andrew, could that be possible? That the small retailer has been hammered proportionately much heavier than the big players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is because the system is so out of date, and so and it's just so out of date, and over the years has just seen plaster after sticking plaster of exemptions and short-term relief for this and that, and it's got to the point where there is no balance or common sense to any of this. So it is absolutely possible that you could have proportionally somebody paying much more at a small business level than a big business. So I think as I said, the only solution is for a proper and fully radical reshaping of the business rate system, and if we're going to see relief added by Philip Hammond, then that needs to be directed at the businesses. It needs to be directed at a business level, not a property level. And it's like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. We see all of these things moving around, and they're robbing someone on one side to pay them on the other. And it's a load of old nonsense. And that's why these really regrettable situations that we're hearing occur, because again, the pub trade has been hit obviously many times over the years by supermarket alcohol selling. Again, that's hit pubs. Obviously, people are drinking less now. It's demographic shifts that we're seeing. The way that in-home dining and delivery companies, delivery food, again, people are going out less. They don't need to go out to eat in the same way as you did, thanks to Deliveroo and Just Eat. So all of these sorts of things are hitting, and the tax system is not keeping up.
All right, thank you very much. And Anthony, what are you doing now? If you've closed your last pub, what line of business, trade, employment are you in?
I'm moving towards the energy sector and trying to help businesses and save money on their energy costs and on their energy contracts.
Yeah, well, good luck in that, Anthony. Yeah. That was a big increase he suffered, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it will depend on where they are, and if they, again, pubs have been massively hit, and pub closures. And in fairness, I mean, there's a lot of pub redevelopment happening right now. Lots of people turning pubs into apartments, into shared working spaces in some places, and I think equally, there is a challenge on the pub sector to evolve somewhat. I mean, there's enough pubs that I go into sometimes that still look they're in the 80s. Sticky carpet, horrible slot machines. The ashtrays still welded to the tables from before the smoking ban was in, and you think, are these places that people want to go? I'm sure the gentleman that just got, I'm sure his pubs were a bit better than that. But I think, again, it's easy to blame landlords, it's easy to blame business rates. But I do think, there is a need for businesses to evolve, and equally for people to be a bit more vocal in speaking to their MPs. Because I think if politicians genuinely thought they were going to get booted out of office for inaction, that we might just see a bit more activity happening.
All right, thank you very much, Andrew. That's Andrew Teacher, retail expert, founder of Blackstock Consultant. He's got to go off and do his shopping now. And we'll continue taking your calls on the high street, but an alarming story is doing the rounds today. 1 in 10 patients has had depression diagnosed as the condition overtakes obesity on GP records for the first time. Depression is noted by doctors almost twice as often as it was 5 years ago, as more attention is paid to mental health, according to official data. We'll get more on that after the 2:30 news with Glenn Tomsett.